Okay, thinking about it. Good afternoon and welcome to the Training the Trainer podcast with Vince Stevenson. Today it's my pleasure to interview my friend and colleague, Mr. David Rigby. David, how are you doing, old chap? It seems like ages since we met just a few months ago in Benalmadena.
Well, I'm in Madrid and for once it's warm. So I've done 2 hours worth of Spanish conversation today and then had lunch out and had a siesta because it's Spain, and now I'm here.
Okay, well, it's great to see you. Okay, David, let's do you want to tell us a little bit about your business, what you're doing right now, but then we're going to hark back to your early days and we'll find out a little bit more about your background.
Okay, well, my name is David Rigby. I come from Manchester-ish, and I run a company called Smart Coaching and Training. And what we do is we do consulting and mentoring and coaching and presenting and training. And we have worked with associates. I've got 30 associates, and they're in 4 continents, and they speak between them 14 languages, and we have 5 religions, and the age range is about 50 years. So it's a very diverse group, but they're also a very similar group because I chose all of them.
Okay, now tell us a little bit about how this came around, because I'm pretty sure that you've done a lot of classroom work yourself, but you work more with associates these days. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, my objective is to find work for my associates rather than me, but sometimes things turn up for me, so I go and do them.
Well, I was going to say that I've seen you working at a couple of conferences, and I would say you're one of the most dynamic people there. One of the most what should we call you? A maverick, bit of a maverick, I think. So again, it's great to see you when you're on stage. You're full of surprises.
Thank you.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about your background. So you say you're from Manchester-ish. Now, where exactly is Manchester-ish? I think I know, but I don't think the listeners would know.
Wigan, which is between Manchester and Liverpool. That's
Okay,
where I was
Wigan.
born.
Okay, and you left home at 18. What's the story behind that?
Well, that's easy. I went to university. And I went to university in London because I wanted to escape. And so I did, and I escaped. And so I studied mathematics and logic in Bedford College, London, which was in those days in Regent's Park, so it's very central. I did my 3 years in London. And during that time, I carried on meeting people from different countries. Even at school, one of my best friends was the only Indian in the school. And I always remember this guy came for tea. And my grandmother lived with us, and she said, "He never ate any bread." I'm surprised, but there we are. That's my memory of him not eating bread. But certainly in university, I spent a lot of time with the Greeks. They're from Cyprus, so I learned a bit of Greek dancing, and I learned a bit about how to read the language. And I can tell you the Greek for tea is tea, and the Greek for coffee is coffee, but you have to read it to learn all this kind of stuff. And then I got a job, and that was also in London. And my first job was a trainee bank manager, which I hated. And I got into computing. My first proper job was in computing, writing programs. And so my career really started from there. And it went through various traditional roles, such as writing programs, programming team leader, systems analyst, systems team leader, and project management. And then eventually I went into consulting. and I've been sort of doing consulting ever since. And that was a series of jobs, including working for PricewaterhouseCoopers, as it is now. And that was in central London with the banking profession. So I learnt a lot about banking in those days. And I also managed eventually to do my first spell of working abroad. I had learnt Italian because I just liked the country. And the company I was working for then, James Martin Associates, they had an office in Rome. So first of all, I went to a conference in Milan where I mistook the main station for the cathedral. It was a good experience, and did the year then in Italy. Still petrified about speaking Italian, but I understood it quite well, and I learnt how to deal with different nationalities, and I knew enough about the culture to enjoy it. But I always remember the first thing that one of my clients was a telephone company, and the person I was working with said, "Oh, it's only 20 years and 4 months and 3 days and 2 hours before I retire." Great. That's very encouraging.
Okay, I can tell you a similar story of my own upbringing. My first job was a civil servant, and as an 18-year-old, and there were people of my age already counting down the days to retirement, and I just thought, I've got to get out of here. I've got to get out of here before I get contaminated by that thought process that they're already thinking about their, 40 years on, 45 years on, they're dreaming about getting their pension and forgetting about actually living life.
Yeah, well, we're now at the point about both getting the pension and living life. I think you have to do both at the same time if you've got any sense.
Okay, so big question: how did you? What were your thoughts about moving career and suddenly sort of jumping into the a training type role, or maybe an L&D role? I think.
Well, when I worked for several companies, I actually set up my own company in 1994, 1996, and I worked abroad quite a lot by that point. And my first bits of work were consulting, so these are quite long projects. And the problem with those is you're never at home. I was never at home because I was always in different countries, and you've no control over it. So I decided to shift away from consulting into training because there were shorter things to do fundamentally. So that's how I got into training. I decided not to do consulting.
Was that a big leap? Was that a bit of a culture shock for you, or did you just?
Basically, if you're consulting and you're presenting to people anyway, and you're running training courses as part of what you're doing, then so it's not a big leap. It's just the big leap is being able to be organized enough to move around fairly flexibly and deal with very short timescales.
Okay. Now, you told me in your briefing document that you married an Irish Catholic. So, did that have any impact on your ability to travel? What was the thoughts behind that?
Well, I think it particularly shows the rebel in me even then, because being a good English Protestant would be the ideal thing for my parents, would have been to marry a good English Protestant, but of course I wouldn't do that. And this would be in the middle of the Irish Troubles as well.
I see.
And so I did get over to Northern Ireland, and my wife's grandfather had me play the piano in a local bar. I used to play in a band of ceilidh music, but I never knew anything from the titles because I always learned everything by ear. And as a consequence, I'm in this bar, and grandfather said, "Well, just play the piano then." And I'm playing all these tunes, thinking, "Oh, they could be Catholic, they could be Protestant, they could be American, could be anything." And the point is, I'm still here, but the bar got blown up shortly afterwards.
Oh dear. Oh, well, Well, glad you're safe for today's
Mm-hmm.
interview.
Well, I mean,
Okay.
I've always loved Irish culture because it's more rebellious than the Brits. They've got better music, and the education is better, and particularly in the arts world. So it's good to know the Irish.
Indeed, it is. We had a bit of a shock about 10 years ago, and that is that my daughter, when she was about 14, she said, could she have her DNA done? So we had her DNA done, and it turns out I'm 23% Irish, which is a very high percentage, but there's nobody overtly Irish in my family.
Mm-hmm.
And but I'm from Manchester, and during the Industrial Revolution, lots of people came over to for the factories and
Mm-hmm.
the railways and the canals, so I mean, I guess that's where that influence came from. But I repeat, there's absolutely nobody in my family who's overtly Irish, and so we kind of lost that a long time ago. Unfortunately, would have been nice. Yeah. Did you see the rugby yesterday? Ireland really smashed England. I'm sure they're very happy about that.
And the answer is, of course, I didn't. I
Mm.
wouldn't. I don't do sport at all.
Okay, that's fair enough. Well, let's leave that one. Okay, so you told me you went to Jeddah in 1994. So that's Saudi Arabia, I think. And what were you doing then?
That was
What
good
was the purpose?
stylist. I was working for two different companies. The organisation I worked for had an office in somewhere in the Middle East, and my memory from that was the client, who was Egyptian and wanted some free software, which I wouldn't give him, and so he threatened to have the agent shot. Now the client was Egyptian and the agent was Egyptian, and I had no idea what was going on. But I found it really, really stressful. I refused to extend, and I came back into England and almost wrote myself off and the car. So I refused to go anywhere in the Middle East for another 20 years. Nevertheless, interesting experience.
How long were you actually there for?
Oh, about 4 months, not a lot.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can get an idea of things in 4 months, I think. You can see which way the wind's blowing for sure.
And you had to drive, and in those days, I could tell the difference between all the different kinds of Coca-Cola and Pepsi, none of which I actually drink now, but those days, that was it in public, at least.
Okay, I see. Right. Now, you've been working for yourself for a long time. What would you say were the highlights and the not so highlights of working for yourself? I've been running my own company since 1990, so yeah, there's been a few ups and downs. So, what are your recollections?
I think the thing you learn is eventually some work will come. And that's always been the case. There's been times when there doesn't appear to be anything, and you have to really push it to find the work and the connections. It all comes from connections. And so in the fallow times, you spend time building relationships, which is what I do now as well, because I enjoy doing it.
Okay. So, what have you got any more highlights or lowlights? So what are the big moments over those years where you felt that things were going great, and maybe those days when things were not quite as you would like?
I always remember the not so great ones. I remember being in Singapore, and my job there was working for a bank to review a project. And I was in Hong Kong. I got taken to Singapore. I met the boss, who then left the country within 2 hours. And I'm there with this team of Chinese managing the Indians. And my job is to review this project. And every time I find anything wrong with it, they take a lot of persuading to be told something's wrong with it, and second, they remove it from the contract. So I had 3 weeks for this, and I refused to say it was any good, and they wouldn't let me say it was terrible. So I wrote the best non-committal report I've ever written. on that one, but it was just so stressful.
Uh,
And driving around Johannesburg was no fun either. And I remember I was working on my last full-time job. I was working for this guy called Sadi, who's from Iran or Iraq or somewhere like that. And we were in Johannesburg, and I went with him to sell this product because his English wasn't very good. And it came with 4 weeks of free consultancy. And guess who had to go and do that? Yours truly. And so we went back again. And on the first day, in the second trip, we followed someone to the office from the hotel, about 20 minutes. And the next day, we went on our own, and it took us 2 hours. And we said, we've been through all these places, Soweto and goodness and all these different places. You can't stop the car. You can't ask anybody anything. You have to keep going. And they were horrified that all these places we've been through to get to the work. So it was the travelling and where you parked the car. Those were the things that were the challenge. Because, I mean, in Italy, if you're somewhere you can't park the car, you give the car to somebody and they take it away and you come back. They also do that in South Africa, but I didn't know what the game was. And if you get it wrong, you might get shot.
cool.
So it's not a risk I was prepared to take.
I
But it was
see.
interesting.
Okay, well, I'm glad that most of us do not have such problems going to work every day. So I generally go to King's Cross when I'm working, and that involves 2 trains and a crush every morning. So that's about as dangerous as I like it myself. All right. So you've worked in 22 countries, David. So any great memories, anything unusual? I mean, you've already mentioned the work situation there in South Africa, but any other unusual situations that you found yourself in other contracts, perhaps?
I think the great skill in working in the Middle East in particular, if you're doing training courses, in theory they're 9 till about 3. In practice, no one turns up until 9:30. And my view was, if anyone turns up after that, it's tough. I'm not going to start again. But usually there's the view of the more important I am, the later I am. And then you've got all the prayer breaks and the breakfast break and the lunch break. And so there's only something like 2 hours when there's a reasonable chance that they'll all be in the room. And that's when you have to do the exercises. And they can be fun. Interestingly, also, I do a card game, which you've seen because you saw it in Ben on Medina, which involves passing cards around. And in the mixed groups, the men had to go around and switch all the cards. The women never stood up. They always sat down. They never moved. I was very pleased in Jeddah to get a group with women and men, and I got them all to change places so they're on mixed tables. And then I go to Riyadh, and there's a fence down the room, and there's men on one side and women on the other. And there were more men than women. So on this particular occasion, I thought, right, we'll use this exercise to get the men to regroup. So I got the men to stand in a line in order of how good looking they thought they were. And then we had the first 4 back in on one table and the rest. And you know what? It turned out to be exactly the same groups that we started with. I was so astonished, I couldn't think of another way to do it. Excuse me.
Okay, I worked in the West Bank in Palestine a few times at the University of Nablus, and it's exactly the same, where you have a mixed group, but all the women sit on one side of the room and all the men sit on the other. So trying to get them into pairs or into groups to work together just doesn't work, and that takes some mental shifting when you see that for the first time and you've got limited time to work with them. So it's an interesting one.
On the group photos, you get a picture of you with all the men and a picture of you with all the women. 2 separate pictures.
Yes, well, They're not allowed to talk to each other, so they prefer not to talk to each other in public. There we are. Okay, so let's move on to you've been trading for a while. So then the financial crash came in 2007, 2008. How did that affect you?
Well, fundamentally, it affected me by not having any work for 2 years and getting more and more in debt. And even then, when I finally got this contract in the Middle East for 12 months, it did nothing to relieve the debt situation apart from keep it as it was. And eventually that cost me my house and my marriage. And so I suppose it was something was inevitable going to happen anyway. But it was still not a good time. And it's only on reflection that I see afterwards how depressed I was about it. And one of the things I did in that depression, well, I got this job. I said I got this job as an analyst in the desert outside Abu Dhabi. And as an analyst, as you well know, you go and talk to people, you think about it, and then you write the report and you present it. Very simple process, except that we presented all the results in Arabic slides. They can't read. And so if any arguments went on, no idea what's going on. So returning back to the UK, I did 3 things. I went to lots of events because I thought I've got to learn spontaneity. That's what's the important thing, is spontaneity, which is what you don't get as an analyst. So I did 3 things. I went to lots of events where I presented PowerPoint on slides I'd never seen. I took singing lessons again, and I learned to sing leading a band in a bar. I used to play in a band, so it's a different category. And I hosted a radio show. Well, hosting a radio show live with guests and music is very good for spontaneity. And I've now forgotten the topic.
We were talking about the financial crisis, 2008.
Oh, yeah. So the last bit, all those 3 things I did in the financial crisis, because I was learning stuff without having any money to do it. And those were good things to learn. And they proved very useful ever since. Back in the Middle East, I then continued skills training insofar as I studied improvisation, and I studied and learned stand-up comedy. And that meant I learned to present with no slides. And I've learned to improvise, which I think I'm quite good at. And since then, in Spain, with one of my associates, Jessica, I've learned clowning. So it takes a lot now to put me off if I'm on stage, because I've done most of these different things. And learning this has been invaluable.
Well, I agree with you. I remember when I first moved to London, I didn't know a soul, and about half a mile away was Beckenham Little Theatre, and every Monday night they held they call it theatre workshop and improv night, and I went along not to deliberately sort of learn skills or those kind of things. I just went to meet people locally because I didn't know a soul in London, and just try and make a few friends locally. But you end up on stage, you end up doing the improv, you end up doing lots of vocal development exercises, and it was just great for my confidence, that aspect, and screwing things up, getting things wrong, and everybody just laughs at you at the in the improv, and it's fantastic. And when you got to go and do that for real, stand in front of a real audience, and you make a little mistake, that used to set me back as well. But after that, 30 odd years ago, that was just like the best training course, best training event I've ever been on, because those little slips don't make any significant difference. So I don't think anybody goes around making mistakes deliberately, but if you do make a little mistake, you can forgive yourself and move on, and don't let it spoil the party.
I mean, one of the things I learned to do on the radio, by chance as this was, one of my shows, I had one guest, and he was a Spanish guitarist. And my show started at 10 in the morning. And at 10 past, I phoned him and I woke him up. And at 10:30, he comes in and I said, well, have you got your guitar? Have you got your CD? And he said, oh, I forgot. And he walked out the building again. So at 11:15, he turns up and we do the interview and we do the CD and we do the live music. And by 11, it finishes. And I learned from that I can talk total rubbish to 10,000 people for 40 minutes, totally unrehearsed. And it's not something you set yourself up for, but knowing you can do it is really interesting. You might have noticed when I was at Ben Medina, because I couldn't get the slides to work, I improvised there. And because we were late on this, I improvised to no people whatsoever what I was doing because you weren't recording it. But it's there.
Yeah, I saw you talking to yourself. I thought you were talking to me at first, but then I thought you're probably better off talking to yourself while I try and sort the camera out. So my apologies about the camera, everybody. but there we are.
Talk amongst yourselves. There you are, Frankie Howard.
Okay. Now, moving on, you made a note in your briefing document about dogs in the Middle East. Now, what do you want to tell us about the dogs in the Middle East?
When I got another contract in Riyadh, and on that point I was separated, and I had the dogs, and I insisted on taking my dogs to the Middle East. Now, the Arabs are not well renowned for liking dogs, but I still took the 3 dogs. I mean, I had a house to myself. I wasn't sharing. And I used to take these dogs out, three dogs on leads. I used to get stopped by all these women who wanted to stroke the dogs and all the rest of it. And there was one time when this enormous big car screeched up to a halt outside in front of me, and the man got out and he said, my wife wants to touch one of your dogs. And it took her 20 minutes to get the courage to do it. But she did. And I was very pleased with myself for that, but a bit of international liaison there.
It's very generous of you to stop for 20 minutes to allow this woman to fulfill a dream, maybe.
Well, I mean, for me, it's just so interesting working with different nationalities and seeing how they all behave. And I think all those experiences means you're not scared of it. And that's what's really important.
Yeah, I think, I've had these problems with the camera on the last couple of episodes, which is unfortunate, and I'll get to the bottom of it. So, but I think in the old days, that sort of disappointment would really have thrown me, and I think it's not a showstopper. It's not ideal, but it's not a showstopper either. So, I think we can just carry on, and we'll have this conversation, and it'll be fine. Okay, now. Tell us about your audiences and what you think. How do you, when you're in front of an audience, David, how do you size them up? How do you know? How can you know what it is they want?
The issue, and this is the presentation I've given before, is about how to include everyone in the audience, because the more people you include in the audience, that is including your conversation, and they actually will react and do something about it afterwards, the more likely you are to get more work. So, what do you know about your audience? Well, first of all, you know who has employed you. So, in that case, and for what? So, in some ways, you've got a chance of understanding what it is the audience will already know. And that's crucial. Because if you're looking to do things using acronyms, you should always explain for the first time when you use an acronym what it stands for.
Yeah.
For example, the PSA, which I belong to, the Professional Speakers Association, if you mention the PSA to anyone in the medical profession, they think it's a test for prostate cancer. So don't use the word PSA unless you explain it properly. Very crucial. But you can look at an audience and you can tell this. You can see what colour their skin is. You can see what age they are. You can see possibly by their clothing how rich they might be. You know from the location where they might be, and you can tell some disabilities, such as they might be sitting in a wheelchair and they're wearing glasses, which means they can't see very well. So you know all that. But what can't you see? Well, first of all, you can't see if someone's deaf. You can't see if someone has neurodiversity. You can't necessarily see if someone is gay or straight. You can't see necessarily if they might be trans. You can't see what religion they are. Certainly, I had an occasion with a friend here who's from Palestine, and we met up, and because I like to assert my own culture, I ordered a glass of wine and a ham sandwich to meet him, and I was quite astonished that he did exactly the same thing. So I asked him, he said, yeah, I can do that because I'm a Palestinian Christian. So don't assume what religion people are just by looking at them, because you might get it wrong. Very important. And if you're looking at, in your slides, you might be using acronyms, you might be using emojis. Emojis, very difficult because they mean different things to different people. So try not to do it.
I definitely don't use emojis in my work, but if I can just come back to the point you made about acronyms, it's a really interesting one. I was presenting at a conference full of accountants, and I was listening to their presentations, and all I heard was this long stream of acronyms that I had absolutely no knowledge of. So effectively what happens is, if you're a lay person, if you're not familiar with those acronyms and their meanings, then suddenly communication stops taking place and you're on the outside.
Oh, you ask. I mean, I had an argument with someone the other week about facilitation, and I'm saying the best thing you can have about a facilitator is they know nothing about the subject. So they can ask the most stupid questions and they don't make assumptions. That went down like a balloon, but it's absolutely the case. It depends on what the audience is. But nevertheless, when you bring a facilitator in, their skill is to facilitate. Then they don't have to know the topic whatsoever. That's the bee in my bonnet.
Okay.
But certainly, go on.
So I was just going to say that I did mention this to the organizer, and I just suggested, would it be possible to have a glossary of terms? Now, I know there's a glossary of terms for accountancy would be about 500 pages, but if he could have just done a scan of those people who were going to be presenting and just asked them, would they be using acronyms? Maybe we just could have had a glossary of terms for the day, because there were a lot of lay people there. It wasn't just all accountants.
I ran a project a long time ago, merger of two companies, and they were trying to define the rules of the technology by merging these two things together. And basically I said, if you can't explain it to me, you can't have it. And that got them on their toes, I'll tell you. It worked really, really well, and I learned a lot at the time. But certainly being able to understand in lay language is very important. One of the key things you have to watch out for about looking at people is their education. What are they likely to understand? Will they understand references to Shakespeare? Will they understand references to Mahler's Ninth Symphony, etc., or will they not? And does it matter? Are you code switching? Are they code switching? Which means they're using a different version of, let's say, English at home than they are at work, which is good for us Northerners. We have to do that. And also, are they American or Brits? Because if I say to someone, that's quite nice, it means it's rubbish. But if an American says that's quite nice, it means it's great. And if Australians say it, I have no idea what it means. So watch out for expressions. Very, very careful. I mean, I like to use expressions, but I think I've learned not to use them, certainly in training, because most of my audience is using English as a second or third language. So I try not to do it. So when you're speaking, watch it for that.
Well, you know, if you work in London, as I do, we have a really, really diverse audience. We have people from all over the world. So something that I've learned over the years is just speaking very, basic English and not use unfamiliar words. So, for example, I would usually say something when lunchtime is roundabout. I'll say something like, "This would be an advantageous moment to go for lunch." But if I said this would be a propitious moment to go for lunch, I think I'd get a lot of blank looks. So just using everyday conversation. My wife gave me some great advice once, and that was if I don't use language. So my wife is Brazilian, by the way, and she said to me, if I don't use language that is recognised in the English language exams that you take for proficiency, then she won't be listening for much longer. So I found that was very useful advice. So just find out what's in
Yeah,
if
and
you're
of course,
to speak at a high level, just use that language that's appropriate and not use too many idiomatic expressions,
yes, and
which
if
are
you're doing this
very,
training in
very
Manchester, you say, now it's time for dinner, wouldn't you?
that's right. Even when it's lunchtime.
So you have to learn all this, you have to know all this. It's very handy.
Exactly. Yeah,
So,
my mother had a lot of idiomatic expressions that it probably wouldn't be advantageous to mention here. But I remember we were in Portugal one day, and my, the guys in the restaurant, they spoke sort of restaurant English. They were very nice and very pleasant. And my mother was very, very chatty. Always, she'd just talk to anybody. And there was this big hill in Albufeira. It's a really, really high hill, and in where she was from, near Preston, they call a hill a brew. And
yeah,
she's talking to these guys saying, my mother was in her 70s, and she's talking to them. She's saying, that is a hell of a brew. How do you get up here every day? And they had no idea what she was talking about, of course.
obviously she was talking about making tea.
No, she was talking about the hill. There you go. I still don't know how to spell brew, by the way, although if we're making tea, I do.
Oh, yes, that's a good one. I mean, the other
Okay.
thing you have to really be careful with is when you've got your audience, you have to remember that different kinds of people learn things different ways.
Mhm.
This comes down to using things like from neuro-linguistic programming, the VAC model, the visual. Some people learn by seeing things, others learn by listening, and others learn by doing. That's visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. And so you need things in your presentation which enables all of those things to happen. And I was having a conversation with someone about NLP recently, and they thought I was talking about natural programming language, natural language processing. And of course, in Spain, it's called PNL, just for good measure. So be very careful.
So,
Watch.
as you know, may I just say, yesterday I was judging a speech contest at Warwick University, and it was great. Although I just had one or two problems. In fact, all the judges who were sort of slightly older than the contestants who were sort of, I would say, 19 to 30-ish, they were talking about various memes online and sixes and sevens, and I had absolutely no idea what they were talking about. So I lost those frames of reference, and because of that, some of their speeches didn't really make a great deal of sense because I just didn't get those references. So again, I think they were talking to their audience, but not necessarily to the judges.
Yeah, you have to watch out for that. I'm all sixes and sevens, is an old expression meaning you're in a bit of a state.
I'm okay with 6s and 7s, but like I say, they've got all of these memes and emojis.
I have no clue what 6, 7 means. I think nobody else has either. It seems to have gone out of fashion again. But you have to be careful with it.
Yeah. Well, I never use it. I haven't used it for donkey's years. Are we allowed to say donkey's years?
Yeah, donkey's years. That's a good expression.
Donkey's years, yeah.
I wonder who understands that one, but I do because I'm northern.
Northern.
One of the things with the international audiences is you have to decide whether you're going to teach things the Protestant way or the Catholic way. That's my terminology. The Protestant way is this. This is the answer, and this is why. The Catholic way, which is done by France and Spain and Italy and all places further south, is a long story, and therefore this. So it's a completely different way of teaching things. And you have to decide which of those things you're going to operate on. And the big challenges with the second one, which is beloved in Spain, is you've lost the audience if they're all from the Northern Europe. They've lost interest because you've no idea what you're talking about until you get to the answer. So we're very, very careful with it. And then we come down to the way people are, which is cognitive diversity. And in reality, some people are more emotional than others. Other people like logic. So if you've got people who are all logical in your audience, it's no use saying, can you imagine this? Because they can't, and they won't. And equally, you work with introverts and extroverts. And the introverts typically like lots of steps and process and logic, whereas the extroverts like no detail whatsoever. I don't do detail at all, and I get bored with it. So you've got this balance, working out from the audience, who's in there, how much detail do you need to go into? And it's a really tricky one. And the best way of looking at that is trying to understand from your audience, are they more scientific or are they more artsy? Because the artsy ones are much more likely to do with emotions. It's very, very bad logic. But the thing that's important is if you're working with someone from a culture, any old culture, and you've got all these stereotypes about the Chinese behave like this, the French behave like that, reality is that only a quarter of them actually behave naturally in the culture they're living in. And they've all learned to behave according to that culture, but it's not natural to them. So that when they change cultures from one to another, then they have to learn different ways of succeeding within the culture they're now in. And another area you have to work with is, of course, is what we call worldview. And is individualism more than collectivism more valued? Is authoritarianism the normal method of management, or do you delegate down to the lowest level? And I spent a lot of time in the Middle East trying to get the decisions at the lowest possible level of seniority, and the management didn't like it because they liked to have the authority, and the junior staff didn't like it because they don't want any authority. So you're imposing Western values on an Eastern culture, and there's absolutely no point in doing it. And then when you come down to this is the global North, these approaches, and you've got all the other ways of working in the global South, storytelling, everything else is ways of learning things and building up connections and cultures. You have to work in the Middle East by building relationships. Without those relationships, you will get nowhere. And one of my friends teaches a lot about this. And it's really about you have to spend time getting to know people before you'd even think about talking about work. But on the other hand, don't be too much inquiring about families because that's personal. So it's that balance, really hard thing to balance. But be prepared to give yourself a lot of yourself away before people will tell you stuff. And that's how it operates. But if you're if you're in a country where everybody knows their place, like India and the caste system, it's very different to make it. It's very difficult to make it egalitarianism. Egalitarianism. How do you say that one, Vince?
Egalitarianism.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And so you've got this balance all the time. All these people in the audience, they all think differently. They all react differently. Everything else, just be aware of it. And you can certainly, the number of times when I'm doing training, I ask the organisers, tell me about the people. And they say, oh, no, I'm not telling you that. You've got to make your best guess.
Oh, great.
And you've had that, I'm sure, but I've had it a lot.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's all of my classes, nearly all of my classes are open classes. So that just means usually individuals coming, they may have been sent by their company, they may be sending themselves, and they could, all I know about them when they arrive is their name and email address. So somebody told me something very interesting a long time ago, and that was whoever you're talking to, wherever you're talking to them, talk to them with respect, humility, sincerity, and if necessary, empathy. And yeah,
if necessary, empathy. That's interesting. Why not always with empathy?
Well, it depends on the situation. Not everybody needs empathy. I've worked with people, who've had addictions, and there's nothing I can do to help them with their addiction or their past. But what the purpose of the interaction was to try and help them, sort themselves out for today and for the future. So, going back to work, going for job interviews, creating a CV, those kind of things. So, like I say, they tell you all sorts of stories, which are kind of sad but fascinating from an outsider's point of view. But like I said, there's nothing I can do about whatever happened to them in the past. So I can empathize with them. I can see where they are today, and I can try and help them in the
Yes.
now for the future. That's what I mean by empathy in those
Okay.
situations.
That's fair enough.
Okay. Right.
So remember this, really, your personality determines how you want to behave, and your culture determines how you should behave. And if you can identify that in the room you're in doing the training, you're doing very well. And you can do that by asking questions in many ways. But certainly, all those different points are very, very difficult to balance in your head all at the same time. But the best way of doing all this is ask people, tell me what you know about this.
I think questioning is a great technique for sure. As a presenter, as a speaker, trainer, yeah, asking the right type of questions. Again, the right type of questions, that's subjective as well. But I think what happens is after, if you've been presenting the same thing for a while, you get into a little bit of a rhythm, and you find a few golden seams that you can explore, and that generally, kind of works for most people. Well, it won't always work for everybody, but if you can score with most people, that's a good feeling.
So you should know before you even start doing the presentation, how are the people going to decide if it's good or not? What's the criteria they would use to choose? I mean, I've always done this when I've been consulting. How will you know I've done a good job? And the answer often is they've no idea how they'll know. But it's useful to know they've no idea. And you can tell them how they'll know.
I think levels of engagement are very important. So for example, in my classes, I try and keep my presentations short, like between 5 and 10 minutes, and then I get them making a speech or a presentation, and then we do feedback, we follow Kolb, And so we've already created some, what should we call them, some guidelines, some theories and principles. Then we
Yeah.
practice, then we give feedback, and then we reflect. And if you keep going around that sort of virtuous circle, people get into a rhythm and they feel like they're making progress. And yeah, I really love that work. It's great. It's a great job to see people, you know.
One of the challenges I've certainly had is how many words you put on slides. Because if you're working with people where English is certainly not their first language, then having words on slides helps them understand. On the other hand, having words with slides is a distraction, because they're busy trying to read the slides instead of listening to you. And certainly, I've been to several things in Spain where it's all in Spanish. And if we get presenters who use slides, I stand a reasonable chance of understanding what they're talking about. And if they don't use slides, I have no idea quite often. So it's that balance. It's learning the balance, understanding what your audience is likely to understand. So that's crucial.
I think that if I went to a presentation in Spanish at the moment, I don't think I would get a great deal from it. I used to speak Spanish really well 30 years ago, but I don't really have a million opportunities to practice these days. Maybe you and I could do some practice together. That would be fun. Although it probably ended in an argument. I don't know. So
never. I would never argue. I don't do arguing.
Let's hope we never argue.
I discuss points forcefully, but I don't argue.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. But yeah, I take your point. I think slides are useful. I think sometimes slides are overused. I think the other thing. So, for example, working in England, working in London, everybody who comes on my course has a certain level of English. Or you would think so. So, for example, I got an email the other day saying that this woman would like to bring her daughter. Her daughter was 14. She spoke English very well, but she wouldn't be able to stay with her in the classroom. One, we don't work with children. We work in the corporate sector, if you know what I mean. There's other organisations like Lambda who work with young people, and there's a safeguarding issue. I can't be in the classroom all the time with her. I've got other things to do, so I just had to say no. But she said that the girl spoke great English. She'd grown up here. But she said, would it be possible for me to sit in the classroom with her? And again, that's really awkward. It's awkward. So we had to say no to that, unfortunately.
I did a remote course recently.
Difficult.
From Spain to Saudi Arabia, and there weren't many people. None of them put the cameras on, which is the other challenge. So you've no idea if anyone's there or not. One of them apparently understood English but couldn't speak it. So finally got round that one by asking the question to someone else, and they translated it into Arabic.
Yeah.
And then they translated it back to me. Very delaying, but on the other hand, that was the only way to get engagement. So had to be done.
I think for me, if I've got 6 or 7, 8 other people, those delays, I just get a lot of requests for refunds. So it's just, it's not worth for me. It's not worth. Although I'd like to.
In that case, they were all in Mecca. So they were all in different bits of Mecca, but nevertheless, they're all in Mecca. So the comprehension was there, the understanding of the problems. But nevertheless, we did get through all the subjects, and I insisted on carrying on. And if I got I asked the questions, no answers, I just carried on to the next one, because you just don't know who's there.
Okay. All right. Now, David, unbelievably, we have been talking for nearly 55 minutes. This is the longest podcast that I've ever done. So I think what we could do is, have you got a few final words for us to, just kind of summarize where you're at and what you're thinking about anything that we've not covered so far in a
I
couple
just
of
want to
sentences?
summarize really. When you're doing a presentation or training or anything else, take time to investigate your audience before you start building it, before you start building your presentation. Try and imagine what they might know already, what they don't know already, and how they might behave and how they might learn stuff. And that's it. People don't
Okay.
do that. But my recommendation is just do it. And that's it.
Okay.
And
All
enjoy
right.
yourself when you're doing it. Tell lots of jokes is the answer.
Talking of jokes, I have a great joke that I need to tell you straight after we've said goodbye.
You know
uh,
my joke. I can't put them on podcast. My joke.
yeah,
They're too rude.
it just takes a little while to set the joke up, but I'll explain to you in a moment. So, David, thank you so much for being with us today. Will you just hold on to the line for 2 minutes,
Of course.
and so I can thank you personally. And I just want to announce our next podcast, which will be with Mr. Vincent Merck, a university professor with a long list of professional accolades. Very nice gentleman. Again, we met Vincent in Benalmadena, and a very nice character, and I'm sure he's got lots of training insights from his professorship. So that's on Friday, the 27th of February at I think 7 p.m. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you then.
Well, thank you for inviting me. And
Thank
I
you,
can talk
David.
about myself indefinitely. You've learned that.
Okay, but we'll carry on in a moment.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.